Nice, just too harsh. I can't see, guys, but good afternoon. So we're going to talk about transformational talent and what do we do to attract it. So let's begin with Mark. So Mark, how do you define the transformational talent? If you were to give a definition to it, what do you say is transformational talent for you?
Thanks for the question. I would say embedded in transformation is change. So with that comes an understanding that a company recognizes that it's either in a period of change or anticipating a period of change. And I would say transformational talent would be the type of person, type of set of behaviors, a mindset who's prepared to drive change within an organization. Okay. And change might be as simple as driving a new set of priorities out, architecting some sort of shift in the organization. It could also be a bigger bet on defining where the company needs to go from here to some point in the future.
Okay. So in Pepsi, how do you define that, Gayatri?
So very much similar to what Mark said, right? It's all about mindset and the attitude that the person brings to the table, right? And we've seen a lot of transformation in PepsiCo. And the kind of talent that we've looked at, the first important thing that we look for is agility. And when I talk about agility, there are different shades of agility. It's about, does the person have change agility, right? And therefore is able to drive change. How little that change may be, but is the person able to drive that change? It could be mental agility, and therefore does the person come with a solution mindset and is able to unlock? It could be people agility, in terms of how do you manage diverse talent and how do you leverage strength? So for us, one of the key things that we look at when we're looking at transformational talent is agility. And especially in today's world.
Okay, agility. Okay, we'll come back to that. It's an interesting word to use.
Yeah.
Okay, Gayatri, what is your view?
So from Airtel perspective, I would say, whatever Pavitra said, I think exactly that. And I would like to add one more point here, and that is to say your ability to actually, getting people on the same page of the vision that you're trying to achieve. I think that's very important. It could be the team who's you will be driving. It could be people, who could be a peer, and also the senior stakeholders. I think that's very, very important. So getting everybody on the same page, on the shared vision. I mean, that's from it.
So alignment, agility, and you said change. Okay, so all three put together. Sashi, you would have done some research, or your company has done research on this.
Yes, so actually we did. And we did research in India. We reached out to about 500 managers across India, across industries, and people who've managed teams of 5 people at least, and have been managing people for the last 1 year at least. And we asked them what traits they see in transformational talent. Mm-hmm. So essentially there were 5 traits that stood out. They were problem solving. Second was efficiency. Third, communication. Fourth was passion. And the fifth one was self-driven.
Okay.
So this is what most people felt was...
3 plus 5. We have 8 definitions now. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, go ahead. Tell us more about it.
So essentially when we try and bucket these into broad level buckets, you'll see that it essentially comes down to 2 things. Mm-hmm. One is experience. Okay. Stuff like problem solving, communication, etc. come with experience. Okay. And then you've got passion and being self-starter, which is essentially about yourself, about innate ability. So it's experience. Transformational talent is made by experience and by innate effort and ability that you have.
Okay. So I'm going to throw this question, and then I'm going to pick the person who should answer this. The question I really have is, isn't it a lot of humbug? In HR we have, and I'm guilty of that myself. I've been in HR, that we run about these new shiny definitions or objects. So this transformational talent looks to me a little bit of this new shiny object all of us are trying to run towards. If and Sashi, I'll start with you. I'll put you the hardest question first. And when you did this kind of a research as what we're calling the transformational talent, why did you think of or coin it as transformational? And what prompted that?
So essentially, transformational talent is, when you look at coining the word and what really contributes to that, is people who have extraordinary influence on the business output of companies. So there was another study done by personnel psychology in 2012, that try to connect the number of people in companies and the output that company is able to generate. The top 1% of any company contributes 10 times on an average more output than an average worker. So that's the impact of transformational talent.
10 times.
10
so
times.
That means if somebody is selling 100 units, this guy is able to sell 1,000 units.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's a big difference, right? So you know, coming to that research or that particular aspect of it, how would you say, Mark, is different than any high potential or top talent or call it transformational talent? Essentially, isn't it the same thing from your perspective, or how would you try to decipher it?
Yeah, I would say transformational talent to me speaks of a longer term readiness. So it's easy to hire for a situation that the company might be in today. It's easy to hire problem solvers for an issue that you have today. If you are trying to engineer the ethos in your organization to things like bias for action, efficiency, productivity, you are going to look for someone who comes in with a skill set that is much more sustainable over time, starts to really spread in the organization is how I'm interpreting. So as it's much more of a contagious effect. And I think of a transformational talent as someone who's, if I can use a U.S. term, who rubs off on other people. So, you know, becomes something that is role modeled, it becomes something that's aspired to, it becomes a set of behaviors that people see. So I don't think it's humbug. I think it's quite humbling for companies to start thinking about these things now. The challenges that lie ahead are unknown. They're uncertain. They are big. They're causing organizations to really shift and focus and pivot very quickly. And you ultimately need people who can galvanize, pull an organization together, role model the right type of behaviors. There is not a lot of time to go through the traditional change curve anymore. There's not a lot of time to digest. You have to have individuals who are ready to run and who are just ready-made to deploy that.
Okay. So let me throw a googly to you, Gayatri, because two of the participants are very American companies, and here's a completely homegrown Indian company. For you, is there a flavor of Indianness in this transformational talent, or is there a flavor of we do something different in India because of which you would like to define it little differently, or do you think it doesn't matter? Whatever the culture is, it's the same thing. There is no flavor of Indianness, because these guys, they did the study here in India. They didn't bring a study from America to say this is what transformational talent means in India, because that is what it meant in America.
So I don't think it's about being an Indian company, right? I think it's about being the culture, the kind of culture you have in your organization. So for example, we are very, very entrepreneurial as an organization. And when we talk about top talent, right? A top talent in a X company may not be a top talent in a Y company, right? Sure. So similarly, for us, a top talent would be a person who's able to perform at a highest level in the current context. Now, what do you mean by current context? So there are two elements to it. One is the culture context, and the second one is your market context, right? Okay. The culture context, like I said, we are very entrepreneurial. So if you do not have an ability to work in a very unstructured environment, you cannot survive in Airtel. You cannot thrive in Airtel, right? Okay. So your ability, so I'm saying the culture is a very, very integral part of our organization. So
yeah, great. I think I like the point of entrepreneurial. I think that's a great point, and I see that in the context of your company that happens many times.
So just one more point. I think when we talk, the transformational talent, right? What Mark said, I completely agree. It's little time bound. So meaning if you have to, transform a situation or your business or a department, it's little longer, right? So to say it will take a year or 2 years or 3 years to transform, and hence you need a very different kind of skill set. When you're talking about top talent, it's a very short-term view to say that the person is ready to take up a larger job in near future. So that's the fundamental difference.
Okay, yeah. Great. So Pavitra, to you, and you mentioned about agility. when you're looking at agility, let's say, how do you, it's a very, I should say, soft term, right? How do you identify people who have agility? What do you look for? And especially both from outside or inside. And then how do you attract those people who have the right trait to say, hey, come work for Pepsi?
So, pretty much like Airtel, we are a very dynamic organization, very entrepreneurial, right? And therefore, agility is one of the key things that I spoke about. How do we look at agility? We've got a very rigorous way of assessing talent, and we do it in two folds. One is obviously there is a proper assessment that happens. There are situational assessments that take place, and we do these assessments at different levels. We've got a senior leader assessment, we've got an emerging leader assessment, we've got a potential leader assessment. So therefore, through a battery of assessments, and especially situational, right, we are able to actually see and gauge whether the person is agile, right, against various parameters. That's one way. And that's very objective. But the other way, and that's an input, the other way is we actually do a calibration, we do a people planning exercise where we look at each and every talent. So every talent in the organization has a talent card. Okay, where we really look at what are the opportunities, what are the strengths that the person has come with, what are the critical experiences. Now, in the critical experiences, what are the kind of assignments the person has done? Has he or she done a fixed assignment, right? And therefore, that actually helps us to assess agility. Has the person done a turnaround assignment? That helps us to assess. So there's a very robust mechanism that we have to really assess, and it's a calibration. So people come together, the leaders come together, and they assess it. They evaluate talent, they look at the talent card, and they say, all right, is the person really hypo-talent? Is the person really demonstrating agility? So there is a rigorous process. There are tools that are an input, and of course there is that discussion and calibration that really happens to really decide whether the person is agile, just as one of the parameters. Externally, we've got the same set of tools that we also look externally. So while internally, we are assessing talent in a particular way based on the competencies that we desire, externally as well, we replicate these tools. And we really assess talent basis that. So it's a very rigorous process.
Can I ask you a hard question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So how much time do you spend to actually look at agility when you hiring people from outside? I want to just calibrate, so it's a generic answer you gave me that you look at it. I just want to calibrate to say, okay, we spend 10 hours, we spend 5 hours. I don't know how much time. Do you really, because the internal process is much more robust,
Yes.
right? Because there's a calibration, you've seen the person and everybody's got a view on him. But when you're tracking and assessing talent from outside, the parameters change a lot. So how do you do that, and how much time do you spend on assessing that?
So honestly, it's different when you're assessing internal and when you're assessing external. But the level playing field is the tool, right? Which is a common tool that you administer internally and externally.
Okay.
So that
Fair
at least
enough.
sets a base level, right? And
Yep.
that's the benchmark, that's the threshold.
Okay.
And then of course, then it's the 30 minutes, 45 minutes of conversation, right? And the ref checks that we do.
Anything you do differently in American Express for checking, let's say they were checking agility or whatever traits you were checking for Mark, especially from external. Internal, I understand you guys are benchmark on many of the processes internally, internal calibration. But when you're hiring people from outside or attracting them, what kind of processes do you deploy?
Sure. I would say that's very forward thinking on the agility tool. I'm going to want to hear more about that later, and we don't have such an assessment. But I think at American Express we would look at things in the interview, in the selection process around bias for action. We would look at things that we often talk about as amplifiers, which really, how does your best skills show up through certain amplifier lenses? One of those is courage. We talk about courage quite a bit. To move fast in our company means that you have to have courage. You have to be willing to challenge conventions around collaboration, challenge conventions around how many people you want to bring along on this decision, on this journey. And you have to really think, if I'm thinking speed, how do I get what I need to get done, meet the organizational sort of cultural requirements, but do that in a faster time, which means that you have to take some shortcuts, and shortcuts are not easy to contemplate when you are a culture that values collaboration so very much. So that courage factor is very high. We also talk a lot about growth mindset. growth mindset many of you may know about it, but one of the things that I love about growth mindset is the appetite for risk-taking and failure, and for learning through experimentation, recovering quickly, and really just challenging oneself to think about the effort it took to get from point A to B, even though point D might have been the desired outcome, but we've moved the conversation forward to get to B, so we have a new starting point. So growth mindset builds in that resilience. And we talk about growth mindset in our screening. We talk about experimentation. We talk about how do you recover, how do you deal with bringing people along. So I would say that feels to me quite agile related.
Okay, Sashi, from your organization's perspective, when you looked at these traits and you did this research, you said you did around 500 people.
500 managers.
500 managers. And have you then gone back and looked, or have you made some instruments to check for these? If people were to use your research to say, okay, this is what we're looking for, are there instruments on your side? Are there things which you can do to integrate to do work on through your side?
No, absolutely. So we've not from our side, because we are primarily driving relevant candidate applications back. But there are a lot of learnings from this study, which we've also used internally in our organization.
Okay.
Effectively, everybody who is involved in the recruitment process has to check for these 5 traits. Whether you're a hiring manager or a recruiter, you actively ask questions seeking that out. Mark mentioned something very interesting about the growth mindset, and he said appetite for failure. One of the first questions that we always ask when we interview people at Indeed is, tell us about your biggest failure. What went wrong? Why did it go wrong? What did you learn from it? And if you were to do the same thing today, what would you do differently?
Oh, is this just for effect, or you really want to?
No, we really want to know, because
really
it's.
want to know. And what are you going to do about it? So I say I failed at XYZ.
No.
So what?
So what? So essentially, why did you fail? Have you learned something from a failure? Is it a failure that you've seen and you walked away, or is it a failure that has affected you, that has made you look inward? Has it made you figure out why that didn't work? And then what have you learned from that?
Okay,
so essentially, what we're looking for is, are people learning from failures?
Okay. So let me throw a question to the people who actually hire for big companies. Would you hire failed entrepreneurs? And how many of you actually hire failed entrepreneurs? The guys who started a venture, they failed it, and they really learned a lot of stuff from it, but they failed. And starting from you, Pavitra, would you hire people like that? And why would you hire?
Yeah, very interesting that you asked this, because Sashi, I asked this question. Every person that I've interviewed till date, that's a standard question, and that's a very important question, because it gives an insight about that individual, right? Self-reflection is a very important attribute that I would definitely look at when I'm hiring, and therefore, has the person really self-reflected on the failures? And what has that person, gained out of it? Just shows the character of that individual, right? And I think it's a very, very important insight that I draw. So would I hire somebody who's failed? Yes, I would definitely, as long as, there is a reason, there's something that the person has learned and grown with that failure. Why not? And that really shows and speaks volumes about that individual. So we've done that in the past. So it's not that we've hired only successful people and people who've outperformed. We've looked at, and again, not looked at people who failed constantly. I mean, obviously, those are some of the lenses that you look at. But yes, there is a learning in that failure. And if you've picked up on that learning and if you've grown with that learning, absolutely.
Okay. Gayatri, you said you're an entrepreneurial company itself. So what's your view on this?
No, absolutely. So it's not just, people who have, started their venture and failed and come. I think, so in fact, all the interviews, at least I take, I ensure that, this question is very much part of my, list, which is to say that, have you ever failed in life, right? And I really probe. And, again, going back to what Pavitra is saying, just to understand, a lot of, everyone fails in their life, right? But the point here is, do you really learn from your failure? That self-reflection piece, really come into play or not? So if you really learn from your failure and you have done something about it, I think then you are the guy, then you're the person, right? I mean, assuming that all other, on other question the person has, failed well. So I think this becomes a very, very important criteria for an organization to, hire a person, to really understand the ability of a person to learn from its failure and then do something about it. I think that's more important. Failing is not important. Your failure should not be wasted is the point.
I like
Right,
that.
so-
Failure should not be wasted. I'm going to steal it. Mark, what's your view? I'll come back to you, Sashi. What's your view?
Yeah, from failure, the message I'm hearing here, and I think it's all about learning. How do you learn? In transformational talent, your starting point as a person, I think there's a vulnerability in someone who's a transformational talent, but there's also a high degree of courage. So it's sort of a dichotomy, right? So it's someone who is open and self-aware and will tell you all day about what they don't know, but they have the courage to try and improve upon that at any moment in time. So the failure is somewhere in the middle there, where it's the trial and error that gets them to keep wanting to learn, gets them to bounce back, gets them to be resilient, gets them to feel like they're as equipped as they would be from day one to just give it another try. And that resilience and that learning and that appetite is key for me.
And I'd just like to add one thing, sorry. We actually have an award internally called Dare to Fail.
Dare to fail?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just to kind of show, it's really a part of our DNA. So we encourage people, okay, if you've tried something bold, you've tried something new, it's okay to fail, right? As long as you've learned and you know what you need to do next. So just to give you an example that we live it internally as well.
Thank you. Sashi, coming back to you. So all these people who would have failed or have XYZ traits, and these companies are looking for those kind of people, how is your company helping the two match?
So for us, primarily, we serve as a platform where we help people get jobs. So we essentially help job seekers come out and...
Now, who are you helping, the job seeker or the company?
So we primarily helping the job seekers, and when we help job seekers, we realize the companies get helped in turn. So that's a followed effect, if I may call it that. But
Okay.
primarily our focus is job seekers front and center.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So, on the topic of failure, I'm very fascinated by it. So I'm going to carry that on for a few more seconds. The first one I'm going to carry is to say, where have you guys failed in hiring? So give me your story for just 2 minutes. What are strategies which really didn't work for you, and what can the audience learn from that? When you were really looking for a talent, and that you didn't really succeed, and then you changed your tacks and you succeeded. So I want to listen to that 1 minute story where everybody can learn from. Where did you fail, and what did you learn from it?
I don't know whether I'll call it a failure or not, but definitely it's a story which I'm very proud to talk about.
Sure.
So 2 years back, when we started, our digital journey, which essentially means, so historically, if you actually see, so the IT was outsourced to IBM, right? And in 2013 or 2014, I think the contract got over, and that's when the decision was, to say that we are going to hire now technologists, in technologists in Airtel. And till that time, we had people who were kind of doing a governance kind of a role, right? So when 2015 that happened, and that was the time I had just taken over this role, and what I realized, we were giving a lot of offers to people, and so meaning, and what really used to happen, typically we were hiring, people from skill set like Java developers, front end, back end, Android developers and all that. And my offer drop ratio was 80%.
Wow.
Right? And 3 months into the job, and I was actually wondering, why, Airtel is such a big consumer brand, and in rest of the, meaning minus IT, if you actually see, the offer drop ratio is hovering around 10 to 12%. And this was 80% was a shocker. So I thought, okay, so let me do something about it. So I went to one of those drives, right, and just to interact with the people who were coming for the drive, and it was a walk-in drive, and there were close to 250 people, and this was in Bangalore, who had come to appear for the interview. So we started asking. So there was a technology guy who was asking from a technology standpoint. I asked him 2 questions, right, very specific, from a HR perspective. I said, why do you want to join Airtel? Now, this guy said, actually, my father is not keeping well. He's in Chandigarh. I said, okay. And it was an eye-opener. So which essentially means, so it's not about the company. It's about the location. So that was one. So my second question was, okay, so what do you think Airtel actually do? So this person said, everything is outsourced to IBM. So your job is just to, supervise. And, that's kind of really hit me. I was like, okay, so this is the problem, right? So the problem was we didn't even, first scan the market. We didn't even scan, what the situation is. We straight away went and started hiring people, right? What this person, said was actually right, but now the reality had changed, right? We had started insourcing a lot of stuff. So I said, okay. So when we came back, we did a lot of stuff around that to say, how do we really, go and talk on social media and tom about our, new, stuff that we are doing from a technology standpoint. And, how, and people, we actually got their testimony, put it on LinkedIn. We went on various social media, platform and tech forum to say that, we have changed, meaning not directly, but, indirectly. That was one part. Second, getting the right recruiter was also very important. Getting right process was important. Getting the right compensation was very, very important. So I'm saying all put together, it was a journey, right? So year 2016, that offer drop ratio actually came down to 50%, and my conversion from 3% moved to 8%. And 2017, we are hovering around 27% offer drop ratio, and the conversion is now moved up to 17%, right? So the point here is ki if you do something and you see that something is not working, you really need to dig deep to understand where exactly are you failing. And once you understand the real problem, I think you can give a holistic 360-degree kind of a solution, and then achieve what you really want to achieve. So learning from a failure.
Okay.
And yeah.
Thank you. I have only 11 odd minutes. I would like to open the floor for questions if you have any. I have a couple of them. If nobody asks, then I will continue my conversation. I can't see. Oh yeah, there's the question out there. Do we have a mic?
Hi, I'm Suraj Narayan. I represent SHRM Consulting. It's a startup search firm. My question is, I've been on the other side of the table so far and started this firm just a few months back. While we talk about transformational talent and hiring of it, I'm sure you must have faced challenge, and this is a challenge even as a search firm, which I also face, that while we look for such talent, at this level and at a CXO level and at a BU head level, we all talk about it, but how much do we really drill down to the people who take the various interviews? Because a lot of people within business are not ready to disturb the apple cart. We still receive JDs saying there's a fixed experience which is required. So we're not talking about transforming the entire process, and the entire transformation exercise doesn't really flow down in a lot of organizations. So do you see the same challenge in your organizations, and if so, how was that challenge met?
So let me get your question. You're trying to ask the question saying that what did you do about the leadership taking the interviews, about transforming the process? Is that the question?
Transformation happening at all the levels of the interview process.
Of the organization, or of the HR processes, or what processes are we talking about?
Businesses are not ready. So you have a large segment of business who still are traditional in the approach and the way they take interviews. So they still want a set number of experience. They still want a certain, they don't want to disturb the existing apple cart.
Sure.
In terms of compensation.
Sure.
So how's that transformation taking place? And
so is the leadership mindset transformation we're talking about?
The internal operational challenge to when you're hiring the transformation.
Okay.
Talent.
Okay. Yeah, you want to take that up?
I don't spend a lot of time doing hiring, but I would like to take a shot at the question. I think what you're trying to understand is how do companies walk their own talk on transformational talent and then show up as companies externally when they're hiring such that they can attract that talent. And I would have to say it's a journey. So at best, I think companies are sorting out what transformation for themselves look like. And that involves everything from the business planning process, from the, where we're making our big bets, even in human resources, we have big bets for the company that are tied to big transformational ideas, goals. Where we are going to go to market differently. How do we want to think big about sales? How do we want to think about investment? And I think every leader is thinking about that for his or her function, for his or her P&L. What does big look like? What does transformational look like? And what are we going to need to drive that? So getting that question answered is a challenge in and of itself because it usually involves some long-range planning and some good leadership discipline involved in staking out the path, the journey. And then the second part is how do you bring people along with that internally? And I would say the third part of it would be then where do you look at yourself and you say this is what we have today and here is what we might need to build versus buy. And all of this is not intended to sound like it takes a long time, but I have to say that for probably for every company, they're at a different stage in that journey. The goal is to have completed it and to be fast about it and start planning and delivering on sort of how you think about talent that needs to come into the organization.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Yeah, you want to
Sure.
you want
So
to
to start with, first companies must understand or acknowledge what this kind of talent can do for the company. What are the quantifiable deliverables that such people can bring in? The second step is to inspire such people. You'll have to understand that if you're good at your job, you have choices. That person has multiple choices, including my current job. There are 10 other people who want to hire me. So it's established why such a person would want to work for your company. The third thing is make it easy for these people to find jobs in your company. Fourth is, if you say that people matter, show in the interview process, establish that people are important, treat them in that way. And finally, when you're making an offer, it's not just about money. It's about what inspires me. Does that offer document talk about what inspires me? If people are able to do that, I think it works well.
Thank you, Sashi.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we have a question right back, and then we'll come to the ladies here, right at the back. There's a gentleman there, just look for a mic. It'll be good if you can
Hello.
tell to whom are you addressing the question.
My question is to the two ladies on the panel.
Okay.
And I am Vinay from Predictive Strategy Group. So you told something very interesting that both of you like to ask a question on that how someone has failed and learned from that failure, right? If we see Google also used to have a lot of interesting questions, like how many golf balls will fit into an aircraft, how many people smoke, and how many cigarette sales would be there. I mean, it's a very interesting questions. But finally, when they did an analysis, they found that it didn't predict the performance. They might be interesting questions, but they don't predict the performance in the long run. So have you also done that sort of an analysis on this kind of a questioning? And second part of this is people who are articulate, they would be able to give you very convincing answers around these questions. So how do you look beyond the articulation to understand the real behaviors and traits of talent?
Okay, you
So
take it
I
up,
can take
Pavitra.
that.
Yeah.
So you're right. We've not gone back and we've not done a predictive analysis because that's one of the questions, right? And and as you rightly said, there are people who are very articulate and will get away with it, right? And that's the role of a recruiter. A good recruiter will look beyond, right, versus just looking at what the person's answered, and therefore authenticity. You will go ahead and probe through situations as well to validate whether the person's saying the right thing or not. That's one. Having said that, as I said, we do have various other assessment tools that will look at various other data points. There is assessment tool, there is an in-person interview, there is also referral checks that we do, right? So every time that we hire somebody, like an employee is doing, a potential employee is doing a ref check on us, right? They go to a Glassdoor, they speak to individuals, so do we, right? Before hiring somebody, especially at senior levels, we do our ref checks as well. So there are various data points that we really look at before making that final decision. So it's not one data point. Like any assessment, battery of assessments, which actually looks at multi-traits and uses multi-methods, we do the same thing.
Gayatri, you want to
No,
add to
I
it?
completely echo, with what Pavitra says. So
Okay,
continue.
okay, great. So there were ladies here who wanted to ask a question. Yeah, right here. Can we have a mic here? There's two ladies. We have time for both the questions. Don't worry.
Hi, yeah. So, I mean, we all know talent is hard.
Who are you asking the question to?
Mark and Gayatri, right?
Okay.
You've spoken about this. We've also heard different ways of defining transformational talent. And
So can you please keep
louder? Yeah, is that
So
better?
can you just repeat the question? We couldn't hear the
Yeah,
first part.
so I said we've heard various ways of defining transformational talent. We've spoken about how getting that transformational talent is hard. The question in my mind is, would you rather pick someone who is sort of well-rounded, so for example, on growth mindset and collaborative, a 6 or a 7 on both, or someone who's spiky, who's probably a 9 or 10 on growth mindset, but is at a 4 or 5 on collaboration? And, if those were the kind of choices, what would you go for?
So, Mark, can I? Okay. So I think, if there is an option, I would really want to balance both, the growth and collaboration. I think this is extremely important because if you don't have a growth mind, you obviously cannot transform. And if you can't collaborate, you obviously cannot reach your destination. I think both the, competencies or, both the points are absolutely and, extremely important for us. But, if there is a scarcity, let's say if there are exactly two individuals, right? And then I think then you really have to do something about the whole arrangement. To say growth you definitely need because collaboration will not take you to the point. Can we do something for the guy to for him to kind of collaborate? I think there you can still do something, but growth is something which he only will have to bring to the table. So I think I'll go for a person who's got higher on growth, little bit on collaboration, but I'll invest on collaboration. So that's the point.
So I'm going to say what everyone in the room is thinking. I'll take high on both, but but I'll say this. Be careful what you wish for. So then you're talking about the supreme levels of talent in the organizations, and they come with very high expectations. And whatever you sell them at the time you get them on board to hire, you better be ready to deliver on it. So this includes really deep, meaningful career conversations, really impactful work that you need to give them. You have to show these people how their work is driving difference in outcomes. You have to think really hard about how you keep them curating their skills throughout the organization. We're spending a lot of time thinking about that now because we want people, we have two dimensions of measurement. We have goals and leadership. So if you're a rock star on goals, we still need you to be a rock star on creating great followership and visions and getting good people to want to follow you. So, it's a tough deal there.
Thanks, Mark. So the last question out there, and then we're going to wind up.
Hi, Pavitra. My question is to you. I have heard a lot on how to hire talent, and a lot of questions have been answered. But I want to know more on how to inspire talent and how to retain them actually, because these days we are struggling with this particular problem. How to retain our top talent, how do we understand that, and how can we catch the behaviors, we catch the early signal that probably they can go towards some other organization, they may look out. And I don't want to lose my top talent. So how to actually retain them and inspire?
Sure. So I think it begins from the starting point is how have you hired them, right? And as Mark said, what's the promise, right? So you've promised people, and it's very easy for recruiters like us to promise something and hire people. Once they come in, are you actually delivering on that promise, right? That's the starting point of that marriage. So you've, got people, you've engaged them, you've got them, you've, signed on that legal document. But if they don't experience what you've promised, that's the first failure. And that's when you start losing and you have disengaged employees, right? And that starts happening in the first 3-4 months when they realize, oh, oops, I've made a bad choice perhaps. That's the starting point. Then it's about every touch point in the employee's life. Right? It's as simple as, we've heard about that. It's about really making the employee experience that. So it's about career conversations, to Mark's point again, right? You've promised somebody, the person's looking for something. Are you actually delivering on that? Are you having those meaningful career conversations with the individual and really understanding what is his or her aspiration level and working with him or her in the developmental journey as well? I think these are some of the things, if you really do, you put your best foot forward and actually start looking at different touch points and really helping that individual, I'm sure you won't have the retention problem. On careers, for example, two of the things that we keep talking about in our organization. One is about culture, right? Are you giving that kind of a culture? Is the culture supportive for the individual to grow in the organization? And are you really helping the person meet his or her aspirations? And career is not necessarily, levels and promotions, right? It's about really talking to the individual and saying, what are your aspirations, and therefore what kind of critical experiences that you need to really go through if that's your aspiration. So walk backwards with that individual and help that person in that journey. I think if these are some of the things, if you're able to kind of do, the individual will be engaged. And that's the key, right? People are not looking at money anymore. People want to be happy in what they're doing. They want to be fulfilled. There's a purpose that they're looking behind every job that they do. If you're able to kind of crack that, I think you'll have an engaged population.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Time's up. Thank you.